Okay. Okay, well, welcome very much to this meeting on June 30th of 2008 of the Association of Cable Access Producers, of which I am the interim one-year president for the association. And we're very happy to have tonight talking to us one of the actual true pioneers, particularly in terms of setting it up at an institutional level, the public access movement, which I am of the opinion is one of the most significant developments in the history of communications. Has a very unique role because of a series of historical circumstances that presented that. Most people seem to think it got started around 1970 or so in a serious way. We've got all kinds of people here that get a lot of experience in that. We're going to give everybody a chance to talk, and George is going to tell us some of that history. I wanted to make a couple remarks here. Those of you who are here and have not signed the sheet with the contact information, if you'd like, if you could try to get to there's two little tablets or two little clipboards over there. If you could add that to your email and that sort of thing to it, we'd appreciate that very much. Another thing I'd like to mention, if I could, one of our fellows who's been out of town for a while, out of New York, Dave Channon. Do you remember Dave Channon? We've been in touch with. He's doing great work up in Shandaken, which is near Woodstock, upstate. And Dave sent me, it only just came in today's mail, and so it might be just worthwhile. It's a reach out. They're going to have a major event. Maybe I can read this little note if you don't mind. This is from Dave Channon, an early pioneer producer and so forth, who's living upstate now with his lovely wife Karen and so forth, and very busy with Dee Dee Halleck, good friends with Dee Dee Halleck and Mikhail Horowitz and some of the people up there. So it says, "Hi Harold, here is a 1-minute He sent me 5, Jackson, knock it off. He sent me 5 one-minute clips about an art exhibit or an art event, and it says, here is a 1-minute promo for the Shandaken Artist Studio Tour, July 18th through the 20th, upstate near Woodstock. It'll involve a lot of people." And he says, "Please," in large print, "hand these DVDs out to your public access friends and ask them to play it on their shows if they can, if they would be so kind." He wanted to let people know. Did a program with David not too long ago about the work they're doing about the watershed. There's a lot of things going on. New York City water is coming from there. There's big movement things going on up there. Good work. I appreciate it. Look forward to emailing the YouTube link to you and so forth from Dave. So we've only got 5. So those of you at MNN that think you might be able to add that to your programming and let people know about it, it'd be good to do. It'd be outreach to the people upstate. A lot of good people up there. The other thing, if I could, I've been giving a lot of thought to public access. And I may be wrong and so forth, and that's always part of the territory when you're thinking things through at trying to think through at a large level. But I've been thinking it through, and I've printed up a 1-page summary of a 15 or 20-page summary of my musings and so forth about the history of cable television, where cable television fits into the communication history of the planet. I've come to the conclusion that public access cable television is totally unique in terms of the history of communication, not in small matter because of the way the whole process is financed. It's a very interesting model where you have public sector represented or civil society representatives had an influence to set up apparently this franchising arrangement where the cable companies give significant monies out of their otherwise retained earnings after taxes to these entities, of which I think there's something like 3,000 across the country, so that the capital costs and the operating costs are able to be met for serious window of competitive capability for the people, which is totally unique. Mr. Paley had no such obligation when he set up CBS and so forth, nor did any of the other telecommunications companies have that, nor does Mr. Gates have such an obligation. It's a very unique thing that relates at a macro level to the economics. I've written up a 1-page summary, which I would invite you to take with you if you want, and then there's links on my website. It says ACAP that has my long, wordy, Buckminster Fullerene, run-on sentences kind of thing, if ever you wanted to look at it. I think there's something there, and I'd really welcome if you could take a look at it when you have some time and tell me where we're wrong. Let's correct it. Let's get it right, because we're trying to get some vision statement and some underpinning to the Association of Cable Access Producers that is going to put us in a position to realize the maximally beneficial capability that this system as it exists might be able to be exerted, and to bring some inspiration perhaps to the cable producers across the country and the world that maybe would be helpful if they could have an association that they could be able to have a sense of participation in, because it makes good sense in terms of the broader evolution of the human society and so forth. So George is going to talk to us. I'm just introducing you to him now. He's going to talk to us, and I know he's anxious that we all have a chance to participate in this. But without further ado, I'm very, very proud to welcome one of the pioneers who was a friend of another, Sidney Dean, who were involved around 1970 as the cable access movement got started. He's going to fill us in on some of that, and then also give a chance for us to participate in a colloquy about cable access, where it stands, and what its historical development, its current situation, and maybe even its future prospects that might be benefited by our association. So George, thank you really very, very much for coming. Really appreciate it. And please take the floor. We can pass the mic as you would like. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sure thing.
When Ray Burns and I set up the Alternate Media Center at New York University, we were trying to continue some work that I had helped start at the National Film Board of Canada. The idea there was that we would create or develop media that would help the people in government and people in the service industry to have more contact with the people whom they served. So it was the general idea was to promote social change. Now, social change comes not when people individually watch something on television, but it comes when people get together. So that we were using cable only as a means of distribution, but the idea was constantly to have the material shown in groups. Now, it would be interesting to me to know from you people, who are all producers now, have you ever thought of using your programs in that way? Well, the silence indicates that you have a very different motivation for your.
I did it in 1980.
So.
1985, I went to Singapore.
Why don't we pass the mic around, and each of you tell me how that concept would fit in with what you're doing.
Please take this mic and talk to me. Okay, pass it around and hold that. Yeah, take that.
And please not only state your name, but tell me something about your program.
Yeah, hi, George. And everybody, my name is John Hammond. I'm the host of and producer of the John Hammond Show. This John with no H. And it's a music, travel, and soft news program. We're in our 25th year. And we started at MCTV, Manhattan Cable TV, on 23rd Street, before we had the numbers on the dial. And C was free and J you pay, and I've been on both, you know. So we started out in a format kind of like a radio show, because I'm a musician myself. And we synchronized high-quality graphics with the music as sort of a visual improvisation to the music, and then I did the introductions in between the tunes and the intro and the outro to the show. So it was in the format of a radio show, but it had a lot of nice visuals. And then eventually, once we started getting field cameras, we started taking them out into the field. In those days, the field cameras were quite large. That's what I was talking about with George. You know, it was, nowadays we have these small cameras, but in those days you had to schlep some hella heavy gear out there, you know. So, but we started getting attention right away because of the quality of our graphics. We were producing our show on 1 inch, which at that time was the state of the art. And so I went to a international music video festival in Saint-Tropez, France in 1985. And they showed our show in a movie theater on a 40-foot screen. And it was incredible because we never even saw it that large. You know, we produced the show to be shown at home on our TV sets, and our audio was quite good because we did everything sort of backwards. Instead of making a soundtrack to pictures, we made our soundtrack in professional recording studios with 24-track recording, and then we put the visuals to the music synchronized, you know. So when we first showed it in a group situation, was in this movie theater in Saint-Tropez, France, and we got a standing ovation for our work, you know. So that was really great to be able to be there and see the reaction over, you know, a theater.
What did you hope the outcome of your program?
At that time, my motivation for starting the cable access TV show in the first place was it grew out of my frustration with the recording industry, and I was trying to get a record deal for a friend of mine who had previously had a #1 hit record, and I had been shopping some really excellent recordings to the heads of different labels, because here in New York we have all the big record labels here, and so I was going to all the different record companies, and we were starting to run out of funding, and I heard about public access TV, and it seemed to make sense to me that we could send out the audio signal through the cable and get high quality audio into many different homes, and at that time into hotels, you know.
Did you have in mind getting response from those people out who were watching your programs?
Oh yeah, we wanted to get the feedback, but my target audience was really the heads of record labels at that point in the beginning. But then we started getting we got some pretty off-the-wall response, you know.
So you didn't have a social agenda for your programs?
Well, we were sending out what I considered soft entertainment to the masses. You know, I made a decision as a broadcaster and a producer early on that I wanted to stay away from hard news and stick with the soft news, and just send good musical message out there with not too much message besides the music itself, you know.
So you were using the space to make yourself a broadcaster?
Exactly.
Okay.
It was one way to get
You
on
see,
the air.
that's very different from the original concept that Red Burns and I had, which we came from Canada. You see, we were hoping that the main users of the cable would be groups of people, organizations, that would reach out beyond their own membership. And we didn't know that we were creating a vehicle which would make some individual producers have a program which they molded for their own reputations. You see, this is a whole different direction from the idea that we had at the beginning. Wow. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that the essence of the cable access when we began it was something very different from what it's become.
Right. Oh, thanks a lot, George. That's interesting. I didn't know that was the original target audience. You know?
Well, let's see what somebody else.
Yeah, whoever's talking, please have this mic, okay? We'll get it on the tape. Josh, you want to pass it along to Josh? Josh's going to have a word or two.
Yes, in all due respect to John, and I do respect what you're doing, and several of the producers are doing it. I am doing something in the line of what George envisioned. I am very much interested in doing programs on social justice, and I want members of the community, I want to interview them, discuss what they're doing and how they're doing. For instance, on one of my programs, I interviewed a DAL, somebody who helps disabled people in housing court and gives them a vehicle to discuss things with the judge and their and the landlord lawyers, and also make demands on the court and get what they want, and so on. I've also had 2 housing groups on, a group of senior citizens, many of them over 100 years old. A few of them came in the studios and expressed their fear that a big developer is going to do a demolition in the next building, and they mentioned what their fears were, and their slogan was renovation, not demolition, you know. And I also had the SRO coalition in, single room occupants. They've had great victories and so on, and I'm very proud to say I played a part in giving them publicity. And I have something coming up with the African American community, 3 programs I'm helping them with. One with a humorous sort of tone, why white folks write black books, and then black women in politics. I spoke to Cynthia McKinney today, but she seemed to be a little annoyed that I phoned her on her son's phone, you know. And I told her I thought the issue, I mean, that she should be more relevant to the issue we want to discuss, black women in politics. And then also we're going to discuss the gentrification of Harlem and how it's dislodging people in the black community that have been there many, many years. I would love to do something with some of the homeless, and actually I've been trying to talk them into becoming producers and do shows on their own, because there isn't any reason why someone who's homeless can't come and learn the skills of doing a TV program. There is no exchange of gold or money or land. However, I don't like the word free, because free is if you're just standing on the street minding your own business and someone gives you something, and doing 81 hours of editing, I cannot really say that's free. There just is no outlay of money so I am very interested. And because I'm interested in social justice, I go down to DC TV, and I understood what George was saying when he said he did something with POV today, which is Points of View, which is a very, very wonderful organization. And of course, Paper Tiger TV is wonderful, and Pacifica is wonderful. They are all striving to give a voice to the voiceless, and I want to contribute to it, and I want to add to that endeavor.
Okay. Who else will want? You want to talk, Lenny?
Louis.
Louis Grenier. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Louis Grenier, and I'm working on a going to produce a public access show. I have a bunch of videos, and I'm putting them together for a show. Your question, that's a very interesting question, because I never think really of show. I mean, I've seen my stuff projected like an anthology where you're in an audience with a lot of people, and the whole dynamics and energy and everything is different than when you're watching it alone at home.
I'm sorry that you have to forgive me. I'm not hearing you very well.
But the energy is a lot different than if you're watching it at home alone. But I'm also interested in, like, when you make tapes and like some of my tapes are geared for people to see alone, I think, at home. They're sitting on a couch. There's tapes for that. But I was also interested, when you mentioned that, I was thinking of when I was in grammar school in Chicago, like whenever they brought a TV in the classroom, like on a World Series, or when when the astronauts went up, how everything on TV looked different when you're in the presence of a lot of other people.
Yeah, yeah,
And
right.
I don't know what that is. And you look at the same material alone, and the same material, how can it be different? Maybe it's the energy. It's not just the laughter and the response to the program. Maybe it's the energy in the room or the dynamics of the whole room.
Have you ever thought of combining the two ideas? That is, having a studio audience respond.
You mean like a live
Yes.
show with an audience? No, I haven't. That's an interesting. I haven't thought of that. That's good. I mean, that's the logistics right away. Like I think the logistics of that, getting an audience and the scheduling and that seems pretty massive to do that.
I suspect that many people in the room have developed a format for for their programs, which was developed out of the necessity to have a weekly program, to meet the schedule, and I believe the scheduling at M&N requires you to have a weekly program, doesn't it?
Yes, or you can put on a special.
So,
you can do a special
yeah,
or a weekly
but
program.
For the most part, you people are doing weekly programs, which you are producing for the public.
Right.
But you're not combining that with the community groups.
No.
No.
Louis?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you could talk about CMA a little and where you are now, perhaps?
Well, I know Harold from CMA. I worked there it was Center for Media Arts. It was a media school on 26th Street. And I taught there, and then I was director of special projects, and Harold came in and did some shows through us, and I procured crews and equipment for him, and it was great for everybody. And I taught at Fashion Institute of Technology too, but then the last 11 years I've been working at ABC TV as an engineer in editing. That's where I make my money and pay my bills, but I feel that I get my enjoyment out of the videos I work on. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking Holly Solomon, the art. She owned an art gallery, the Solomon, and she once made a statement that art should never be shown outdoors. It should be shown indoors. And that's kind of similar to this thing. And I thought about that, and there's some correctness to that. I mean, like the Washington Square Art Fair and things like that, maybe art lends itself better to be seen indoors than outdoors. And maybe like video, I don't know, maybe groups of people should be watching it or are at home alone.
Well, all of you, I believe, are fairly experienced producers, and so in effect you've made names for yourselves. Is that the objective?
My objective is to just get my work out there and shown. That's my objective. And I guess the byproduct is you somehow get some some notice, and your name gets out there. Yeah.
I recognize how difficult it is to produce a show week after week after week. I know the labor that goes into it. And so I'm curious to know what keeps you going, because many of you have been producing programs for a long time. Is anybody willing to give me an answer on that? What keeps you going?
Do you want to hear?
Here's George.
All right. I'm Ugly George, and none of you are here now because you were all kicked off and public access was stopped in June of '81 by action of the New York State Legislature legally. I'll get to that in a second. If you want to know the results of what public access can do, I have 42 million links on Yahoo. I didn't put any of them up, the people did. Now, some of you may think that Ugly George is bad, pornography is bad, or a lot of other things are bad. What you don't seem to realize is that's just the opening wedge to get rid of public access. That's the excuse. We've got to protect the innocent children of New York City and New York State from the evil of pornography and kiddie porn. Sounds plausible, doesn't it? Except that's not the real reason. The real reason is let's get rid of public access. So in June 1981, the ever-corrupt New York State Assembly passes a bill, 8-1. It doesn't say Ugly George, but everybody knows that's who it's directed against. So the Assembly Committee passes a bill allowing, that means requiring, cable companies to decide when a program is pornographic. And it's at the sole discretion of the cable companies. So Harold Hudson Channer is a pornography show because the cable company said it was a pornography show. Okay? That's what this bill said. 8-1 against me. 8 corrupt New York State legislators led by the unlamented late Assemblyman Melvin Zimmer of Syracuse. Now, a lot of you think that Syracuse is hundreds of miles from New York. All right? Even though Harold seems to think so, there is no public access in most of the United States. There was none in Syracuse in 81. But Zimmer, being corrupt, was able to say, if public access were to come to our fair town of Syracuse, we'd get smut like Ugly George here. So that's why I got to have this bill passed. I hear about it. I go up to Albany on the invitation of someone I can't mention. I meet the Speaker of the New York State Assembly at the time. His name was Stanley Fink. The New York Times writes a very wonderful editorial. Let subscribers censor cable smut. The Times is very powerful. This is the only time it had ever done this. I think it's the only time they have done it since then. And what they said was, we at the New York Times hold our liberal noses when we think of Ugly George. He's a male chauvinist pig. We don't like what he does to women. But we'll defend to the death his right to do it. And the proper remedy for anything on cable TV, whether it's a smut show like Ugly George or an intellectual show like Harold Channer, let the subscribers decide. They're paying for it. It's not up to the state legislature. Quietly, we kill the bill. Now, although Harold doesn't believe this, there is a town not far from here called Philadelphia. It just got public access. 35 years after Manhattan. And why 35 years? I don't have Philly Incorporated with me. It just came out because they might get an Ugly George on Philadelphia public access. So that's why Comcast couldn't allow access in Philly for 35 years. They just got it now. But it's not like MNN, and I keep telling you this, someday you'll learn it. You don't walk up to a window at the cable system and drop off your tape. You drop it off to a community group, in quotes, which has been named by the government of Philadelphia, the cable system, the archdiocese, the rabbinate, and anybody else they can think of who's negative. So then when you hand it to this community group, the community group then does what we call vetting it, which means censor it. And they decide if you can go on the air in Philadelphia. 35 years after Channel C, Channel D, and Channel J, finally access comes to Philly, but not really. And that's the way it is in most of the United States. Okay? Now briefly, whether any of you know it or not, tape is dead. This camera is being discontinued from Panasonic, but it's a chip camera. I hate to read crap like Macworld that says, tapeless cameras are not a Mac's best friend. They're the best friend in the world. So soon, you'll all go to tapeless cameras, whether they're from Panasonic or not. Thank you.
Okay, somebody else want to say something here? Oh, okay, Joe, by all means, get in front of the camera.
Oh, thanks. I wouldn't have thought of such a thing.
Can't get Joe behind the camera. He's always behind the camera. God bless him. There we go.
I'm glad you finally explained it to me, because I always felt out of place from the beginning, that I was an individual, and a lot of the categories for community. And I felt like, am I just being egocentric? I don't quite fit in. And even the name Manhattan Neighborhood Network doesn't quite suit my purposes. That my reason for getting into public access was to educate the public. And when it came to which part of the public, I didn't really focus on a community. I didn't even focus on Manhattan. I was basically thinking like an ABC, CBS. What I had to say was really appropriate to say to the whole nation. And at times when I have to fill out forms and they say, where's your, what audience is your program directed at? I was really at a loss what category to pin the tail on the donkey. So I'm still at the general proposition that that the media doesn't provide the truth we need to be a informed democracy, and I try to take up the slack and provide that additional information. And as you learned by now, I guess I am one of the 5 or 6 people in our system that has a daily show. And in my own case, the way I worked up to a daily show was, in addition to my weekly show, I was producing 2 other weekly shows for other people. And the provider, Manhattan Neighbor Network, didn't complain because they liked the shows. They were all good shows. And in general, with my shows, I don't stick my face on particularly. It's just more of like a C-SPAN going around town, getting visiting luminaries. So it suited Manhattan Neighborhood's purpose to have good quality programming to make them look good. And so when I had 3 shows going, to go from 3 to a weekly wasn't a big deal. I mean a daily. So that's the scoop. I've had different names for my shows. The original one that Harold was excited about was Fundamental Change. I didn't stick with that. I went to Radical Truth and Signs for Our Times. And of the shows I was producing for, I was producing Alternative Views New York City. And the Here and Now show, which I still produce for. In addition to my own daily show, I do a weekly show for Here and Now. And you asked the question, is it a hardship to produce so much? Basically, I look at the the calendar that comes out weekly of all the social activist meetings, and I work out my schedule, which of those I want to cover. And if I cover 2 or 3 a week, that usually gives me enough material for 5 shows. And so that's how I managed to do it. Okay, so that's my little story.
And your name, the name of your series now is Inspired.
My name, Truth for a Change.
Great double.
Is the name of the show. Yeah. Okay.
My name is David Kaufman. I started my show about a month before we invaded Iraq. I had a vision of how to stop it. So I got a special. It was about February of 2003. We invaded Iraq on March 20th. And everybody realized it was happening. Now, if anybody wants to get on cable or the internet worldwide, I tell people that what you got to do is fill out a form. See, I'm in all the boroughs, but every other borough beside Manhattan requires a sponsor. In Manhattan, you can live in Timbuktu, send in a mini DV, and it can be seen worldwide. You have to be non-commercial and legal. So that's one of the things I tell people on my show. So normally you have to wait 2 weeks to have your show, but they took my hour show, which is usually seen twice a month, and they played it 4 times in a row. My vision was to have a human awakening chain reaction. A 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. So in 9 cycles of 10s, you'd have the whole world could be united to tell the UN, go after Saddam Hussein with bounty hunters, put up $100 million on his head, that was my idea, and $10 million on everybody protecting him.
Mhm.
And then they would bring him in alive. His 2 sons, who were vicious than him, could have brought Saddam Hussein, they could have put him in a cage, my idea was, and have, cameras on him.
How do you check the effectiveness of your shows?
Well, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested to see.
Wait a minute, you do all of this labor, and you're not interested in knowing whether it actually works.
I didn't tell you what my show's about. I just told you how I got started. I was one show. Then I did 3 more shows for an hour over a period of time, and then I got a series in in 2003 in the fall. I tried to reach the students.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Friday show. It was called Soft Love Explorations. I was exploring soft love, being gentle rather than violent. And then I did another one from the fall, or the spring show, the winter show. So I had 6 months behind me, and this guy who was in charge then said, who wants to have a daily show? That was something new. Joe didn't have a daily show, and neither did him, China. So the 4 of us that have daily shows that are individuals right now, because of that event, this guy opened up when he left Japan, the director. Okay, then, so I had an hour show at that time. An hour show, for a whole year, I had an hour show where I spent half the time trying to teach mathematics to the students and science, and the other half was my political agenda. Then this guy, without telling me...
Well, may I stop you there just a minute? You were teaching mathematics.
Half the show.
An
hour show.
Did you ever test to see if that show was effective?
A lot of people come up to me and say, "Oh, it was a great show." I'm not interested in. I'm just interested in promoting out there. Anybody, and there's 550,000, they claim, of the Time Warner that can tune in. Anybody in a hotel coming here can tune in. I try to get the best time, 7 in the morning. I would go early to get the students, but that's the earliest I can go. And I had an hour, then I got a half hour, which was cut off. And so I gave up the math and stuff. I just taught politics, how to transform this world. So I have 5 agendas. Basically, one of them is meditation, to awaken peace in us. That's one of my agendas. The other one is to create a 1-10-100 citizen network for the common good. Each person got 10 people in any time cycle who do likewise the next time cycle. For example, get 10 people in a week, new, uninvolved people who do likewise the following week. That's a 1-10-100 network. It could be a modern-day town hall. And then in 9 weeks, any 9 time cycles, you can reach 1 billion people in the entire world to dialogue about the common good. Most people do one-on-one. Oh, I'm doing good, one-on-one. But I say to be a citizen, and my definition is the entire world you should be concerned with, to have joy, peace, and prosperity for all, not just local.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my mission. Meditation, a human awakening chain reaction, and then I'm interested in getting the students to not follow their the folly in the world. The parents eating, I'm a vegetarian, I promote vegetarianism. So if one person hears me, that's enough. I don't have to, I'm not concerned with my name, who I am. I don't tell my name. I'm not looking for fame. I may have fame now, but okay, I'll live with it if it happens, but that's no problem. So I want to awaken the children to do something with their lives instead of just messing up. I have a lot of ideas in education which I have to been promoting how to do it, to do fellowship. That's the key thing. So I talk to Joel Klein on the TV sometimes. This is Randy Weingartner, these are people who are top people. Do this, they're not doing the right thing. I believe in bigger classes. The cut-up should go to smaller classes where you have karate people and all kinds of military police. So I believe in groups of 9 against groups of 9, groups of 3, 3, 9. So I have a whole thing. I'm not going to talk about it now. I'll be developing it. So far, I just sit in front of a camera and talk, but I've decided this summer I'm going to interact with other people to promote ideas that I haven't been promoting.
Well, both you and the preceding speaker talked about education.
That's critical.
I've spent about half my life as a teacher, and I would go out of my skull if I didn't have routinely times when I saw whether or not my teaching was effective, with tests and answers and student reports and so forth and so on. You don't seem to have that.
Well, that's not important to me. What's important to me is that I have this audience and I reach out to them.
But that's all, you're just putting it out there on faith.
What? That's good enough for me.
Okay.
I don't have to, I'm very scientific minded. And
well, wait a minute. Is that science?
I say I'm very scientific minded. That's why I don't have to always apply it. But okay.
Does anybody here have an answer for that?
What's the question?
Yeah, the question is, you make these programs, you make them for a purpose. How do you know that they satisfy that purpose?
Well, if they don't, if I haven't created a human can I ask you a question?
Yes. But make it short so that other people can have a chance to respond.
I'll make it short.
All right.
I know because I haven't created a human chain reaction yet, so I keep changing my thing to try to do it. Okay? When I create a human chain reaction, then I'll know I've succeeded. So far I haven't. That's my answer to you. I didn't finish saying what I wanted to say.
Well, because I'm a member of the older generation like some of you, I'm not too big on email, but when my program is over every week, I get phone calls from a lot of people telling me how much they enjoyed the show. I converse with a lot of my listeners on the streets. Of course, I live in Manhattan and so on, and in central Manhattan on 86th Street, and I also sell books in front of Zay bars, to supplement my income. So I not only pick up new people to interview, but I interact with a lot of my listeners, and they tell me, and they discuss with me all aspects of the program and so on, and tell me how much they enjoyed my interview with Lynn Stewart and her husband Ralph, or with the SRO Coalition. And certainly I've already told them about Ugly George. And the only thing I have to really say about Ugly George is when they asked Karl Marx about some sort of a sexual reference he made, he said, "Nothing alien is human to me." And last weekend, when I was selling books, a woman came over and looked at my book on sadomasochism, and she said, "I have to buy it for my boyfriend." I said, "Who's your boyfriend?" She said, "My boyfriend is Jamie Gilels." I said, "Is he around?" She said, "Yeah, he's shopping in Zabaz." So Jamie Gillis came out, the famous porn star that you've heard the name, right? Jamie Gillis made maybe 1,000 films, and lo and behold, he bought a book on the Holocaust from me and a book on Robert Burns. So in that field, anything that human beings are involved in, whether whatever it may be, should not be alien to us as producers. Now, the woman who had bought it to him owns a Mexican restaurant on the east side. And I want to apologize to the people who are watching us now, because we have many creative women producers, and we all have women in our lives, and it's a bit almost shameful that none of these wonderful women, except the Web Fairy, is with us tonight, and so on. In fact, we just came back from a weekend, and we enjoyed the hospitality of a wonderful woman who George has been friends with for 50 years, before Harold was born. So I want to say you must find out whether your audience, after my show, I get many phone calls at home about my show, and people have been telling me about every show. They say, hey, this is the best show you've ever done. So I still have quite a few shows to do, and I still have the best one yet to do. Okay.
Joe was going to say something. Oh, and then David said he didn't get enough time to talk. You raise a good point as far as feedback to confirm that our aims are successful. My own orientation was simply, if people watch continuously, then I have won them over as far as being interested in what I present. As far as whether or not I succeed in educating them, I felt if they just sit through the lecture, I'd be pleased. That in general, the people who do the talking are pretty clear about what they want. But an additional point, as far as the popularity of the show, to determine how many people watch it, M&N would tell me that apparently my show is popular because they get a lot of phone calls when there's a technical problem. And they use that as a guide.
It's always a good test, yes.
And that was about all we had for a while. I was trying to pressure the management of M&N to pressure Time Warner to share information they had on polling or surveying, because I had assumed that on the sly, Time Warner does keep track of how many people watch what. I wasn't clear whether they could do it electronically or not, but I felt that for political reasons, if there were popular shows in M&N, that it was in the interest of the carrier, Time Warner, to belittle public access as a tactic to say it's not important, people don't watch it. So I felt like there was some conflict in getting accurate information. But to this point, as I understand it, Time Warner has maintained that they don't have this information of who's watching what. So we don't know, but it would be helpful.
Let me give you an example of the kind of thing that I'm looking for. As a filmmaker, as many of you know, I've been making films for 40, 50 years, nearly. I made a film called All My Babies about a midwife. Now, I know that film has been effective because many people have told me, we watched that film and we decided to have natural childbirth. Or I watched that film and I decided to go into maternity nursing. Or I watched that film and I decided that we had to do something about better care. That's the kind of feedback that I'm looking for. I made a film called Shepherd of the Night Flock about the jazz priest at St. Peter's Church, and as a part of that film we made something called People on the Move, about how the Lutheran Church at 54th and Lexington made the big move and sold their property with preserving the right to put a church underneath the 5th tallest tower in Manhattan. And it was a good example of how a church in the inner city can make such a move and not lose its congregation. So we did that very carefully, and we've heard from a number of congregations who use that film to do that particular purpose. This is what I'm looking for, and so anybody in the room can give me that kind of example.
I used to sometimes put my box number down. I got letter telling me...
I'm not talking about responses, I'm talking about results.
Results?
Yes.
Well,
A phone call is not the result. A phone call is a gratification, but I'm looking for something a little beyond that.
well, people have told me, a woman wrote a letter, I didn't ask for a letter. I just said I wanted to send things out
Okay.
to them.
Yeah,
And they got a
okay.
letter saying how wonderful my show was, how it opened
okay.
her up.
So it makes us feel good as producers,
She said,
but
she
does
told me
it go beyond that?
She told
Because
me,
you see, the reason I'm insisting on this is that we are using public funds, we're using public airways, and if all we're getting is our own gratification for that, our own fame, our own recognition,
I don't want
I don't
fame.
think that is enough.
I don't want fame. I want to communicate a message that's not being communicated. And I'd like to make my final pitch. You can have the floor. So
I got a good example of this not long ago when, as you know, every once in a while I appear on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And somebody said, I saw you on the box. And somebody else said, I saw you on the box. I saw you on the box. I've started saying, what did I say? And nobody comes up with the answer. They just saw me. That's not enough.
People have told me that they liked my math show. I educated them.
Mm-hmm.
I had many times. I don't go looking for it. So evidently my math, they remember that even years later. Whenever I taught the math, it was effective.
Try to hold the mic towards you.
Okay. Okay. I'm using my hands.
Audio check.
I'm using my hands.
I know.
I won't use my
You must be
hands.
Italian.
So I've got a lot of good feedback from people who compliment me for my efforts in math. Okay, because I'm a good math teacher, and that's another story. But right now I have something that's worth saying. I'm saying it on my show. Oh, by the way, my show used to be called Soft Love Explorations. Now it's called Ethical Social Networking. I'm trying to create this ethical thing. And I have a vision of creating America to be energy independent. And the key idea there is, I've studied about the wealth. I know about the wealth of this country. I know about the income of this country. And my idea, I have an innovative idea that people, even when I talk to them, they go, oh, wow, that's a great idea. You know, a lot of my ideas are great. That's when I talk in person. So I'm talking to the people out there, the same ideas. People get turned on by this idea of a human chain reaction when I talk to them one-on-one. And so here I'm talking to the whole audience. Excuse me, with my hands.
Well, Harold,
Yes,
you probably have had one of the more successful, in terms of the audience and reputation and so forth, one of the most successful programs. What keeps you going?
You want me to? I was thinking others were going to talk, but you don't want me to talk because I can talk for 45 hours. It's just endless. I'll have it. I'll sit here.
Sit down.
I'd be happy to say a few words. All those good words are being said by everything like that. I come out of academia in geography, comprehensive consciousness, interested in a great polymath, Buckminster Fuller. Incidentally, it's a great show at the Whitney now, currently celebrating Mr. Fuller, and he was a major thinker. I also like Marshall McLuhan very much, used to visit with him in Toronto for 3 years, tried to have an understanding of the evolution of universal consciousness. The show at the Whitney says begin with universe, so that might be another way of saying begin with the most comprehensive kind of context within which you're thinking that you can, and then come to the particular. Saw him on a television program. I came back from Bolivia doing doctoral work in Bolivia among the Aymara Indians for 2 years. Came into Detroit. It was black and white television, 65, around Christmas time. Came on the television, 2 people within 1 week or 2 weeks, both of whom had the same message. One was Buckminster Fuller, and the other one was Marshall McLuhan, and they both spoke to intellectuals and to young and so forth, saying, dare to be a comprehensivist. That is, understand patterns between specialized fields as academia was galloping towards specialization. So I got interested in the media, knew Paul Ryan. You may have known Paul, and you knew Paul maybe, and others. Radical Software, that magazine, and there was a lot in the wind. I think 1970 is a major year in the evolution of universal consciousness. There were all kinds of things going on at that time, not the least of which, maybe in the end, the most significant one is it was the birth of public access at an institutional level. Sidney Dean, a friend of George, and others were setting up an institutional framework that is extremely, extremely important and overlooked by the society at large. And I had to confess to George earlier today, I was doing programs with a lot of people, senators and all kinds of things. You go to Washington, do a program, put it on. And I wasn't thinking much at all about the institutional framework. People were thinking that way. And I think public access cable is, I've been doing a lot of thinking because we've been talking about it at ACAP. And I've come to the conclusion that we've done about 2,500 hour-long conversations where we go in depth with people and so forth and get accused of talking too much, saying the same things over and over. Got a lot of quotes on my site that I like and so forth, and got some patterns that I'm looking for. I'm looking for patterns and not specialized details of any particular thing. And for whatever it's worth, I wished you would take this little thing I printed up about 20 copies of. I wish you would take it. It's a one-page summary of my thinking about public access. You can take it with you when you leave. And what it is I don't know if I'm right or wrong or anything, but I think public access is really unique, totally unique in terms of the history of communications, not a small matter. Communications is the DNA of the society. And it's completely unique in the sense that at a very pragmatic level, we tend to think in terms of ideological things and everything, but at a very pragmatic level, if you think about society and the news writ large, it's all formulated within a dialectic of a certain sense where you have 2 main entities or loci of power and influence in the society. One is the private sector, that is the profit-making corporate, and the other is what is usually called public sector. I think that should be reserved for us, public access, because we're the only thing that's really public. It's really governmental when they talk about that. So you have a loci of power where they have the ability to tax and to spend and to regulate. And all the news and all the reporting and all the thinking in the loci of power are formulated within that dialectic. You had emerging out of a magic year, as it were, 1970, real representatives of what they call the civil society. A lot of the NGOs came out of that and so forth. George would have been one. Sidney Dean was another. He was at the City Club, major figure. He was saying to one and all, he was the head of the media for the largest advertising agency, knew the business well, knew the political fathers, knew the society in general, but he represented civil society, the people. That was Martin King, Malcolm X, Civil Rights Act, Voter Rights Act, big expansion in class action law, Woodstock if you want, Vietnam, Kent State, all of that. 1970 was a major year. There were other things going on in terms of the evolution of the